Hello and welcome to Beyond Fundraising, How to Build a Robust Texting Program, which is a sponsored training by Prompt.io. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brenna, she, her. I am a customer success manager at Prompt. However, at my heart of hearts, I am a digital and distributed organizer. I have spent the last few years working on dozens of political campaigns up and down the ballot, from state house races all the way up to presidential primaries, as well as some really awesome nonprofits and advocacy organizations. So in my career, I've overseen programs that have sent about 150 text messages. So I'm really excited to be here with you all to share some learnings that I've had over the last few years doing this. So when we get started, now that you've met me, I'd love to meet you as well. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Go ahead and drop your name, pronouns, the organization you're with, your location, fun fact about yourself, whatever you'd like to share with us so we can get to know each other while we're on this call together. A couple of housekeeping pieces before we get started. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat feature. My partner Tamila is in the chat and she's monitoring that and going to feed me some questions at the end so we can get those all answered. You'll also have the ability to text in questions while we're going through this program. We'll get you a phone number in just a little bit. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, you want to ask me by text, you can do that as well. Or at the end of this call, if you have some more questions and you want those answers, please feel free to text in that phone number and we'll be able to take those questions after the call too. So as I said, at the very end of this call, we'll go ahead and take questions all together. We should have about at least 15-20 minutes to take questions at the end. So a quick little tutorial on what Prompt is all about. So Prompt is a texting platform for political, advocacy, nonprofit, and commercial organizations. We were founded in 2014 and our headquarters are in the beautiful sunny Seattle. It is sunny today. It's normally not. I'm about an hour south of Seattle. And we provide both A2P and P2P texting capabilities across short codes, toll-free, and 10 DLC. If all those words are gibberish to you, we're going to cover those in just a second. So our agenda for today, we're going to start out with a primer on texting terms. I know people are coming with different understandings on the texting space. Some of you might be pros, others might be brand new or don't even have a texting program. So I want to make sure that everybody has a base level understanding so that we can have a conversation together going forward. After that, we're going to talk about how we can push past fundraising. We'll do a quick calendar planning activity so that you have the tools that you need to apply these learnings for your organization. And then we'll close out with Q&A at the end of the call. So to get started, we're going to do a quick survey. The platform that we're using today does not have survey capabilities built in. So I figured why not get texty with it? We are going to be talking about texting anyways. So at this point in time, if you want to text survey to 206-603-0022, you will get a survey on your phone. The first main thing that we're looking for is the answer to two questions. The first question is to check the last political text that you got. Think about how you'd categorize this. Is this going to be a fundraising text message? Was it a volunteer ask? Was it a call to action to maybe call your senator? Or was it something different? Maybe you got a little informational text message. The second question is to think about the last political text that you or your organization sent. How would you categorize that message? So these are going to be two surveys we're going to check in on in just a second. I'll give you a minute to fill that out. There is going to be a second page on your survey for contact information. So if you have questions following this call, you can feel free to, I can reach out to you with that contact information, but you don't need to fill that out if you don't want to. And then a fun fact with this phone number, as I mentioned previously, if you have questions in the future, you can find that same conversation thread and you can reach me on this phone number. So I'm going to be quiet for 1 minute while y'all are filling out the survey, and then we'll move on. All right, it looks like some survey responses are coming through. So I am going to go ahead and keep going. There'll be a couple minutes before we're going to go through the survey results. So if you're not done yet, totally fine. But let's keep going and talk a little bit about some texting terms. So as I said, I know people are coming in with some different levels of understanding on the texting space. So we'll go through some quick texting terms, so hopefully you have a baseline understanding. Keep these terms in mind because at the very end, when we do our calendar planning activity, we're going to talk a lot about these texting terms and how they kind of define what message you're going to be sending and how you're sending that message as well. So the first thing is, how are messages being sent? There are two main mechanisms to send out text messages. The first is P2P or peer-to-peer, also known as person-to-person. And this is required by TCPA compliance rules to be used if anybody has not explicitly given you the permission to text them. So if they have not checked a box on a form or written you an email saying like, yeah, I love to get text messages from you all the time, it is required that a person manually hit the enter button to initiate all of these messages. I, in my past experience, have really relied on peer-to-peer for almost all of my texting because it's a wonderful volunteer activity. So even if you have A2P capabilities, which we're going to talk about in a second, peer-to-peer might be what you use on a regular basis as a really great volunteer opportunity for your organization. Peer-to-peer tends to be a lot more conversational. So that person who's initiating the message is able to respond to whoever you're texting. So you can have a really great back and forth conversation there. A2P or application to peer, also known as blast texting, is the other way you can send messages. So there is a 100% opt-in requirement in order to send via blast text. So there's no clicking required for volunteers. You queue up your broadcast, hit submit, and then a computer sends off all of those messages for you. These tend to be a lot more notification based. So one-way communication, you're making an announcement to your list who is opted in. And then if they respond, oftentimes that's handled by a bot. So you'll use keywords. So reply yes if you would like information on where your polling location is, something along those lines. A general best practice for you to start doing today is start gathering opt-ins to build out a robust texting list. This is as simple as adding a field on your web sign-up form that says cell phone and have a checkbox that says, I'm opting into text messages. This is something that you'll always want to check with your legal department on to make sure you're being fully compliant, but I would absolutely recommend starting to gather your opt-ins today. The next thing we're going to talk about is what is actually in the message. So there's a couple ways that messages can be sent. The first is an SMS or a short message service. This is going to be a message that's all text and maybe some emojis. The other option is your MMS or your multimedia message service. And this is going to be a message that includes an image, a video, a GIF, audio file, something along those lines. So it's going to give a little bit more flavor to your text message. The last thing to know is that text messages are built off of a segment. So a segment is a 160 character little package that the carriers send out and are received by a phone. If you are familiar with old school texting, when you had a flip phone and you actually had to hit buttons that like 3 times to get different letters. Those were limited to 160 characters. That was the original text message size. So now you can send multi-segment messages. The one thing to note is more segments cost more money. So when you are sending out text messages, there are underlying costs with different carriers and you are paying per segment. The more segments you use, the more deliverability issues you can run into as well. So when you are sending out messages, they go to the cell phone carriers, and the cell phone carriers will decide if that message is going to be delivered or not. If you're sending out 5-6 character messages, you can run into some deliverability issues. So segments are an important thing to keep in mind as well when you are composing text messages. And then the final thing we're going to cover in our primer is the types of phone numbers that you can use. In the political space, we really use 2 of these phone numbers. The first being a short code, which if you remember back to 2020, text join to 30330, that is a short code. So these are primarily used for that A2P or blast texting style messages. They are very high volume, big campaigns and big organizations will use them. They tend to be a lot more notification-based, less conversational. However, they are very expensive to set up. It's going to set you back a few $1,000s, and it'll take a few months to get going. So there's a 100% opt-in requirement to be able to use a short code. Some of y'all might already have one, and if you don't and you plan on doing really high volume opt-in texting, you want to get that process started as soon as possible. The second type of message second types of texting code that we use pretty frequently in the political space is down here at the bottom, and that is our 10-digit long codes or 10 DLC phone numbers. So these are what people are most familiar with in the peer-to-peer space. These are going to be the local area codes, like that 206 number that you just texted, that you're able to send more personal, localized conversations over. So there are new registration requirements for that, and there is going to be a link in these slides, which we'll share at the end, to a webinar that's all about the new registration requirements. And then tomorrow at the 2:15 time, there's also another training about these new to compliance regulations that is being hosted by Sandy Fox. So hop on that if you have time tomorrow. But 10 DLC numbers or 10-digit long code numbers are really fantastic to use for peer-to-peer. So if you're running a big national organization, you can acquire phone numbers from different states. And when you're texting into those states, your local volunteers can use those phone numbers and have really local conversations, even though you're a really big national organization. And if you're running a local campaign, you can get phone numbers from your area code so that when you're texting your voters, you're able to have local conversations because you are a local person. So those are the main two ones that we use in the political space. There's also toll-free numbers, which are more frequently used in the commercial space, but there's a 100% opt-in requirement for toll-free numbers as well. They have high throughput, relatively easy deployment, but they can feel less personal because it's a toll-free number as opposed to a local area code. So now we're going to take a peek at that survey to see what our results were. I'm not going to share my screen because the data is a little bit messy that we're looking at. But from this, I'm seeing that we have the majority of folks are saying that the most recent text they got was a fundraising text. And the most recent message that their organization sent out was an informational message. So I love seeing this. The second place for incoming messages was a call to action. So I'm loving seeing that we've got call to actions. I was expecting fundraising to show up here, and I love seeing that informational messages are the most commonly outbound sent message from your organizations. But we're talking about going beyond fundraising, but we cannot ignore fundraising in and of itself, because fundraising is what texting is used for really, really frequently. The reason that fundraising via text is great, there's a couple different reasons. First, it's got the highest read rate of any type of outbound message you're going to send. So about 97% of text messages are read within the first 3 hours of sending them, which is a really, really high read rate. If you compare that to your emails, it's kind of laughable. So it's got a really great read rate. So people love to use it for fundraising. Next, it's relatively inexpensive to do. You're looking at a few cents per message that you're sending out. You can send a ton of them really quickly. And you're going to raise a whole bunch of money doing it too. So there's a really great ROI when you're using fundraising or texting for fundraising. However, there are some downsides to really relying heavily on the fundraising portion for your texting program. First and foremost, everyone is doing it. Last week was the end of the quarter. I don't know about y'all, but I was getting like tens of text messages asking for money every single day from different organizations that I love and candidates that I support, and then some people that I don't even know. So by the time I get my third text of the day, I'm not really reading them anymore. So when you think about these really big pushes, like everybody does end of quarter pushes, your return is going to be lower on that because fewer eyes are actually going to complete reading your messages. Next, there's a relatively high opt-out rate with your fundraising texts. So when you look at a full suite of all the different types of messages you can send out to your supporters and your voters, your fundraising ones are going to have the highest opt-out rate most frequently because people don't necessarily love always being asked for money. And in the long term, it can damage your relationship with your supporters and your voters. So you don't want to be like Mona Lisa Saperstein and all you do is ask for money all the time. People like to be asked to be included in your organization. They don't want to feel like just little purses that you're talking to. So think about pulsing in some other types of messages to have a more healthy relationship via text with your supporters and voters. So let's move beyond fundraising now and talk about a couple different ways that we can use texting to help your organization. So I'm about to put something up on the screen and every organizer in the room is going to be like, oh, hey, I know that. And that is the ladder of engagement. So the ladder of engagement in organizing is all about moving your supporters from low-level actions like signing up for an email list to maybe joining a phone bank and then you're going to move them further up to doing in-person events. And now they're recruiting more volunteers, they're donating, they're volunteering 75 hours a week, and they end up at the top of your ladder of engagement. So the ladder of engagement really lends itself well to explain how we can use texting in these different spaces where your volunteers and supporters may live. So at the very bottom, we have our cold list, which is our list of future supporters. They are not even on the ladder yet. They may not really have interacted with your organization or your campaign, but they could love you in the long run if they were introduced. The next section we have, which is about the bottom 2/3 of your ladder, these are going to be your warm list, which is broken up into your voters and your supporters. And then at the very top, you have your highly engaged supporters. They're your ride or dies. You know them by name. You see them all the time. They are the core part of your organization. So we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. The reason that we're going to start at the bottom is because as we go from bottom to top, you're going to be adding on these additional layers. So everything that everything you do for your cold list, your warm list is going to get as well. And for your hot list, they're going to get what happens with the cold list and your warm list too. So your cold list is your future supporters. And the main use case we're going to talk about here is voter identification. So voter ID is just like what you would do at the doors or on the phone, but better by text, in my opinion. So here's an example of a voter ID message that you could possibly send. This is Pancake. He is running for president, and he is going to be our example for this training. So hi, Fluffy. This is Noodle with Pancake for president. Pancake is running for president to ensure all pets get adequate belly rubs. Can Pancake count on your vote on November 3rd? Reply stop to opt out. So this is a basic version, like a cut and paste version of what you would send out. You would say hello to the voter, introduce the volunteer that is sending out these messages or the organizer sending that messages, let them know who is running and why they're running, and then ask them for their vote. At the very end of this message, it's really important to give the people the opportunity to opt out of messages because you want to be able to, you want to make sure you're respecting your list the best you can. So if somebody doesn't want to hear from you, you want to stop texting them. So by including opt-out language, you're making it easy for them to remove themselves from that list. So the reasons that I love voter ID via text, there are many. But first, our one texter can make about 10,000 plus attempts in a single day via text message, and in return, ID hundreds of voters for your organization. These volunteers are also going to have more time to respond to voters' policy-related questions. I've been recruiting for canvassers or phone bankers. The number one concern volunteers have is, what if there's a question I don't know the answer to? And this is a very valid concern that they have. They want to make sure that they're representing your candidate or your organization the best they possibly can. And if they don't know the answer, they're afraid they're going to let you down. But via text, you can take the time to do research, reach out to your peers, make sure you have the right answer, and then you could respond to that voter in time. Voters are also going to expose their true feelings over text, so you're more likely to get an honest ranking of your candidate for better or worse. And they'll let you know what issues are most important to them. So they might say, no, I'm not voting for you because I care about this policy and I don't care or there's no policy platform that your candidate has about this policy. Or they could say, oh my gosh, yes, I love your candidate because X, Y, and Z. So you're going to actually have a paper trail for this conversation history or a digital one. So that data collection and verification is really easy. The number of times where I've looked at canvassing results from door to door and I'm like, oh gosh, what happened here? It seems like they are like all over the place. They're undecided, then they're ranking them first. I just don't understand what's happening. And it's really hard to go back and figure out what happened at the door. But via text, you can always pull up that conversation and see what actually happened. I am not going to pretend like there aren't some downsides to doing text-based voter ID, but there are some really great positives that go along with these downsides, or I guess you can kind of dispute the downsides. First, I've heard from field organizers that the quality of this ID is bad. I am going to have to fall back on what I always say, that people are nice to your face. They'll be polite over the phones and they will be honest over text message. So people are going to give you a very true feeling of if they love or hate your candidate via text, which can be a little challenging to read sometimes. However, at the doors, I can attest to this myself. I've had people knock on my door to do voter ID, ask me to vote for a candidate who I wasn't really interested in. And I have inflated my true feelings to that volunteer because I want them to feel happy and I'm proud of them for knocking on doors. And so I might say that I'm leaning towards voting or I'm considering voting for this candidate, even though I'm not. And I know if I'm doing it, other people are doing it as well, because you want to be nice to the person that shows up at your door, but you don't have that same level of connection over the phone or over text. But what I think when they're saying quality of ID, what they really mean is that they're less likely to turn out, because I've also heard this, and you're 100% correct. If you are relying only on text messaging to do your ID and voter turnout and persuasion conversations, you're not going to be as successful. However, when you think about all the time that your canvassers and callers are saving by not doing voter ID at the doors and on the phone, you can think about all the time they can invest into persuasion and turnout, which is where they really shine. There's even more benefits to texting as well. So your texters are going to be some of the most dedicated volunteers that you have. Peer-to-peer texting is highly addictive. People will log in for hours upon hours to send text messages and answer questions. And when you run out of text to send, they're going to be like, whoa, where can we get some more? Please, I need some more. Next, they're going to be some of your most knowledgeable volunteers because they are spending so much time answering questions and doing really great research. They're going to learn about your platform policies. You're going to learn about voting rules in your area. They're going to learn about your volunteer experience because they're going to find people who want to get involved and they're going to need to answer those questions. And because they're so dedicated and knowledgeable, they are very promotable. They make great volunteer leaders. They can help to train other people. And some of the best hires that I have made have been from within my texting programs. So what happens after voter ID? Now that you've ID'd these voters, they're going to move up onto your warm list. However, you're going to want to partition these voters into two separate sections. First, you're going to have your protected voters. These are your undecideds and your leans towards. You want to make sure that you are focusing all the messaging that you're sending to them on gaining their votes. And then you're going to have your supporters, the people that are planning to vote for your candidate. These folks can get like more of the volunteer asks, they can get more of the fundraising asks, but you want to protect those undecideds to make sure you don't lose their votes because their votes are more important than their dollars. So let's move into our warm list and talk about a couple different types of messages that we can send here. First and foremost is voter education. We all know that people get excited to vote, but we also know that voting can be really, really hard. And if somebody's excited to vote for you, but they don't know how, that doesn't really count as a vote. So voter education, I believe, should be included in every texting plan. So a couple examples of voter education that you can do is voter registration information and deadlines, putting out a call to action a couple days before the deadline to have folks check their registration and have their friends check their registration as well. You can help people find their polling location via text, remind them that early vote and election day are happening, and then give them very important voter protection information so that they have success when they get to the polls. And if you ever want to talk voter education and texting, please reach out. I would love to. I could do an entire training just on that, but we don't have enough time for it. But I spent the whole of the 2020 general election running an absolutely massive voter education, voter registration, GOTV, texting program. So I'd love to spend any time talking about how you can integrate that into your texting plan. The next type of text you can send to these lists are low-lift asks. So you can ask them to complete a survey. You can do this as a follow-up to voter ID as well to figure out what issues they are most concerned with, which can really help you craft your messaging to these specific people going forward. Next, you can do event invites. So this is not a volunteer ask, but more of an event. So like if you're hosting a town hall, you can reach out to all of those undecided and leans towards voters to fill up your seats. That way they can hear directly from your candidate so that they're more likely to vote for that candidate. Other things you can do are have people sign a virtual petition, call their elected officials, and then what I'm really excited about talking about is ballot access. So a disclaimer before we hop into ballot access is please be sure to follow your local requirements for ballot access. I am in Washington State. We have different rules than other places. It's very easy to gather signatures. So one of these things we're going to talk about, basically everybody that needs to gather signatures can do. The other one is going to depend on your state laws. So in 2019, the presidential primary that I was on, we ran a fully distributed ballot access program. So we relied very heavily on our volunteers to help us gather signatures. We had an awesome ballot access team who trained them up, made sure that they were being compliant in their state. And then we used texting to help us get these signatures. So the first one that we did was what we called a drop-in and sign event. So Fluffy has already let us know that they're going to be voting for Pancake. So we can send a message to Fluffy saying, hey, to get Pancake on the ballot, we need to collect 3,000 signatures from Washington State voters. So we'll be gathering signatures from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. this Saturday at the Ballot Farmer Market. Can you drop in and sign? So we would text people within walking distance from these different events so that they wouldn't have to travel far. They're literally just going to walk down to the farmer's market anyway to buy their flowers on Saturday, and let them know that we're going to be at this event and they can sign the petition to get Pancake on the ballot. This is a very high reward, low ask, because you are giving them the power to get the person that they want to vote for on the ballot, and they don't have to make much effort to be able to do it. So that was the first type. We had a lot of success doing hyper local event invites for ballot access. And then additionally, in other states, what we would do is a print and return style petitioning. So once somebody had signed a petition and we already knew that they were interested in helping out, we would reach out to them and text them a link to the petition that they could actually print out, have a couple of their friends or family members sign, and then return to us so that we could submit them all together. And we had a lot of success with this very distributed way of doing ballot access. And a lot of that was due to the texting that we did. So this is just one way that you can get creative with texting to help other parts of your organization, and also communicate with people that you already know are interested. The last one we're going to talk about in the warm list are our campaign updates and what I like to call fundraising. So fundraising is similar to fundraising, but a little bit better. So to define fundraising, it is a verb. It's gently nudging your supporters into a donation without making them feel like they're a walking checkbook. So this is a great way to text people who are maybe not consistent donors, but they are interested in your organization, and you can give them information and then give them the opportunity to donate, but you're not directly asking for it. So first, you've got a policy launch. You put up a brand new set of policies on your website and you want people to know about it. You can send a text about this launch linking to your website. And since you are fundraising minded, your website likely has a pop-up that comes up when you go to the website asking for a small dollar donation. So you've nudged them just by using the tools that you already have built. The last three are a little bit more exciting. So again, in 2019, when we launched our very first campaign ad, what we did is we embedded our ad onto an ActBlue page. In the description of the ActBlue page, we didn't mention a donation at all. It was all about thanking them for their support and letting them know what their support was able to do for the campaign. But then along the side of the screen, you had a couple low dollar donation asks. So 1, 3, 5, 10, 15. When we ran this program, we sent out a text and it was just like, thank you for being a supporter. Check out our new ad. You made this possible. This was what I would view as one of our most successful fundraising campaigns because our opt-out rate was really low. People did not opt out because we were not directly asking them for money. And we had the highest number of individual contributions on that texting campaign compared to any of our other fundraising campaigns. Was the average dollar donation extremely low? Absolutely. But we collected so many $1, $3, and $5 donations because we weren't asking for money, but we were giving people a reward and then giving them the opportunity to donate. The same idea can be applied towards endorsements. It's not uncommon for me to receive a text message that says, hey, I'm an elected official and I'm endorsing this candidate. Can you chip in $25 to help them win? So that is a direct ask. What you can do with this, though, is have a video of the endorsement. So you can have your candidate and the endorsing person meet together, have a quick video, or do a little Zoom cap like we do in COVID days now. Again, embed that on an ActBlue page, suggest donations, and never ask them directly for money. And then finally, merch drops. So again, 2019, we had a highly merch motivated supporter base, and our limited edition merch would sell out very, very quickly. So what we would do is send out merch drop notifications. So our texting list would get texted as soon as something got dropped. They'd be able to get first grabs before things sold out. And we raised a ton of money doing this as well, just notifying people that there was new merch in the shop. So again, hot tip, protect those voters. Those protected voters are more important than dollars because votes win elections, even though some people would argue dollars do too, but I would like to see a world where votes won. So segment out those undecided voters and your lead toward voters from your direct fundraising asks and only put them in their fundraising asks. So now we're going to get to our hot list, which is the people that you know by name, your highly engaged supporters and volunteers. They're going to receive the same ID message because you want to ID everybody. Even though somebody's a max donor does not mean they're necessarily planning on voting for you. Then they'll get everything from that warm list, and then they can get more frequent messages as well. So in addition to what we have already talked about, a couple different types of campaigns you can run are building an opt-in list. So you can text people and ask them to fill out a form to opt in to receiving texts. It's done pretty frequently. It's not crazy. You don't get a high opt-out rate. You're just asking permission to continue texting them on a regular basis. The next thing you can do are direct volunteer asks. So these ones, you'll probably want them to be not absolutely insane asks, but depending on the relationship you have with this existing volunteer, you can save a lot of time for your organizers. You can do things like invite them to a phone bank, and then once they say yes to coming to the phone bank, you're going to get a higher yes rate via text than you would over the phones. You can have your organizers reach out and do those confirm calls. You will have higher attrition doing volunteer asks over text as opposed to doing direct recruitment calls, but you can have your organizers still do those confirms, make sure they show up, and then they're still saving time to do persuasion and turnout for your voter contact. This list can also get more frequent fundraising as well because they love you. They'll give you money. They'll give you their time. They're at the top of the ladder for a reason. So now we're going to go through and do a little exercise building out your calendar. Just a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. We are collecting those to answer later on in the call. But let's get into the very, very fun calendar planning process. So the first thing we're going to look at is our campaign calendar. So every campaign has a calendar with the major dates that are happening. Most times, each individual department has their own calendar. And so what you'll do for your texting calendar is merge all of these together. So you can see that we're going to have a candidate fundraising video that's asked for by our fundraising department. Our candidate's holding a town hall. We're hosting a weekend of action with our organizing department. We've got a couple pieces of voter information and voter training. We've got an end of month fundraising push. We've got a rally and our election day coming up. So on this left-hand panel, this is going to be the date for all of these different events. And on the right-hand panel, you're going to have the date where you're going to text. So for your fundraising, you're going to do it on the same day. Event invites 48 hours before tends to be the best time frame for that. You're giving them enough notice to make a little bit of a plan, but not too much notice that they forget that they had made this commitment before. And then you're going to do like same day for fundraising. And then for election reminders, 24 hours in advance or the night before tends to be a really good time because it allows people to get that last push before they forget. So those are the kind of the different timings that you might look at. And then you're going to have your lists. So who are you targeting with each and every one of these individual broadcasts? So now that we have our campaign calendar in list form, we're going to drop it onto an actual calendar. So this is really great especially if you're a visual person, because you can colorize your different lists to be able to easily identify how much cool off time we're giving them between asks. So your hot lists or your very engaged supporters can receive much more frequent text messages. So you can see we've got 48 hours in between. Your warm list and your voters, you're going to want to give them a little bit more cool down time. One thing to note is since we're looking at GOTV, people are going to get more frequent text messages, but a general best practice during not election time is to shoot for 1 week, like 1 text per week as your major pushes. You'll notice that in between these major pushes, you're also going to have big empty swaths of time with not much happening. That's okay, and that's actually good to have because that allows you to pulse in some of those hyper-local text campaigns. So if you have an event happening in one neighborhood, you can invite people from that neighborhood to attend that event. And that's okay because it's going to be a completely different style message, which we'll go through when we go through the composition part. So being able to pulse through different types of messages at different points in time to create a really well-balanced flow of communication. So we'll go ahead and talk about composition, and then we're going to go through the practice of actually doing this. So if you can think back to the texting primer way back at the top of the call, we're going to have a couple questions that are going to be related to what we learned about. So the first question to ask yourself is, what is the ask? What specifically am I asking for in this text message? And will it be more effective if I use an image with this, or is it okay to send just as text? So keep in mind your multimedia messages are going to cost a little bit more, but they can increase your engagement for that text message. But like everything, there are diminishing returns when you're using multimedia messages. So if every text you send out includes a picture, that picture becomes less valuable, and you might as well have sent just regular text messages the entire time. The next question that you're going to ask is this a conversational message, or is this a broadcast style message? So are we expecting a back and forth conversation? And if you are expecting a back and forth conversation, who should be sending and replying to these text messages? Does this need to be somebody who has a personal relationship, or can it just be any old texter? And then if it is going to be a broadcast style message and you have an opted in list, do you want to send this via peer-to-peer so that your volunteers can send it? Or would you prefer to send it via blast text message to save your volunteers a little bit of time? The last question you'll ask is, how long does this message really need to be? My general best practice is to keep it to 2 segments. Sometimes it has to spill into a third, but I really try to keep all of my text to 2 segments long. Keeping them short and sweet. Tweet length is great. This allows the people who are receiving it to just look at their phone and digest the message in one go. When you're sending out really long text messages, people don't actually take the time to read through every word. Keep in mind that the more frequent the communication is, the shorter your messages are actually going to need to be. If you are only texting once a quarter at the end of the quarter and you're giving a full update on what you've done with all the fundraising money you got last quarter and why you would like some more now, that's going to be a very long message because you're trying to give them all that information at once. But if you're reaching out on a regular basis, asking them to volunteer, letting them know about the different events that your organization is holding, you don't need to put so much in one text. You're able to break that up over the course of the month and keep the conversation going with that person so they feel engaged with your organization. So then you can keep your messages even shorter. So we're going to look at 4 specific events on here. I know it looks like 5, but we have a weekend of action, and there were 2 text messages we're sending for our weekend of action. We've got our candidate video, we have a rally that we're hosting, and then finally we have election day. So let's talk about weekend of action first. We are going to do 2 pushes for this text message. The first is for host recruitment, and the second is for volunteer recruitment. For your host recruitment, you're going to hit your hot list, that top of your ladder of engagement, and have an organizer who's familiar with these volunteers send out this text message. So this message could be as simple as, hey, Fluffy, it's Noodle. Pancake for President is hosting a weekend of action next weekend, and we're looking for Canvas or calling party hosts. Can we count on you? This organizer has a relationship with Fluffy. So Noodle and Fluffy talk on a regular basis. They're used to communicating with them. So that volunteer or that host ask is going to be a stronger ask than if some random person who they've never spoken to asks them to do the same exact thing. So once you're able to recruit your volunteer hosts, and again, we're doing this about a week in advance of when the weekend of action is. So they have time to go through the training for hosting this event and planning and recruiting and all of that good stuff. And then we're going to do our second wave 48 hours before the weekend. So for this, if you're able to, have those hosts send out those messages. That way they can build a connection before the event even happens. So this might be, hi, Baxter, this is Fluffy. On Saturday at 10, we're meeting at this location to knock on doors to get out the vote for Pancake. Will I see you there? That way, when Baxter shows up to the event, and they're like, hi, I'm here to volunteer. And then Fluffy introduces themselves. They'll be like, oh, Fluffy, you texted me. I'm so excited to meet you in real life. This is an interaction that I've had so many times running texting programs for local events. So that helps to build a relationship before the event even happens. And they're going to feel a lot more comfortable being there, knowing that that's a person that they've already talked to that's hosting the event. So for this event recruitment, we're going to hit our warm list. So all the people that are going to be likely to volunteer with us, and then our hot list of people who did not sign up to host an event because maybe they didn't have the bandwidth for it that week. But that's kind of what the weekend of action is going to look like. And you'll notice that both of these texts, they are not multimedia messages, and they're very short because this is a frequent communication that we're going to be having with our volunteers to get them out to different events. The next type of message we're going to send is a candidate video. So this is a fundraising ask, but this is a fundraising ask. It's going to not be a direct ask. And this, since it's not a direct ask, we're going to be able to send it to our hot, warm, and our protected voters lists. So since it's GOTV time, you can have your candidate record a thank you for your support. Here's what our plan is for GOTV pump up video. And you can post that on an ActBlue page with a small dollar donation options. Again, since we're avoiding a direct ask, we're going to introduce this as a announcement video, a thank you video. So, hey, Fluffy, we have just over 2 weeks left in this election to get Pancake over the finish line. Pancake recorded a short message to thank you for your support. You can watch it here. Send them a link to that ActBlue page. So again, this is not an end of month or end of quarter or end of cycle fundraising ask. This is 2 weeks before the end of or before election day. So you can kind of disguise a fundraising ask within a pump up video. The next one we're going to talk about is a rally invite. So it's the end of your election. This is your last big event, so sending an MMS is probably a great option this time. You can get a little bit more attention, a little more excitement when you look at a message and you see that there's an image there as well. So you can have your digital department either design a flyer or just use the same graphic that you're using on social media and then attach it to your message. So this one is going to be a broadcast style. So you'll notice that there's not a specific person who needs to send these messages because we're just kind of throwing it out in the universe and getting people to attend our event. So election day is almost here, Fluffy. You're invited to celebrate the amazing campaign that we've run at our GOTV rally with Pancake on Monday, 11/1 at 7 p.m. the night before election day. RSVP here so we can save your spot. So some people might respond. Some people might be like, oh, I didn't know that was election day. What do I need to do? Because you're kind of doing a multifaceted text. You're giving them information about the election. You're letting them know when the last day to vote is, and you're inviting them to a really exciting event. So this can be done to your hot and warm list. If you're feeling really excited and there's a lot of capacity at your rally, you could also text your protected voter list as well. But we didn't go over this here, but we did invite those folks to a town hall previously. So you'll just want to kind of decide for your organization if you want to invite them to the rally. And also because it is GOTV and they are voters that are receiving frequent voter education information, they're probably getting a little burnt out on this texting list. So the last one we're going to talk about is probably the most important one in my heart, and that is your election day voter protection information. So this is going to go to your entire list, whether or not they've already voted, whether or not they're even local. I would send it to everybody so that information is out and people are prepared to help their friends and family vote as well. So you can absolutely use a multimedia message here if you want to. If you already have a graphic that's designed, it's election day. Why not go big? So you want to make sure that your voters are equipped with your voters or your campaign's voter protection information, if at all possible. So happy election day. Today is your last chance to vote for Pancake. Polls close at 8 p.m., so make sure you're in line before the cutoff. If you have any questions about voting, don't hesitate to text back, or you can call our voter protection hotline at phone number. Thank you for being a voter. So this one is not going to be a direct ask. This is all broadcast based. There is a really cool feature in most texting platforms that gives you the ability to redirect your inbound phone calls. So if somebody calls a number that you text from, most of the time those are not hooked up to anything. They're just a texting phone number. But you can route those phone calls, if your platform allows you to your voter protection hotline directly, or to a team of volunteers who are fielding these inbound calls on election day. They may be having some voter protection issues, so they can route them directly to VotePro, or they might just have some general questions like, do I have to bring my ID? And that's something that most of these volunteers will be able to answer. So get creative on how texting can integrate with your full voter protection plan on election day and throughout the entire cycle. Because texting is a really powerful tool to be able to communicate really, really far. Another great thing is to pre-plan for election day and have common questions answered in text form, so that your texters are able to field these common questions. So where can I find my polling location? Do I need to bring my ID with me? How do I double check if I'm registered? All of these questions that might come up on a regular basis can easily be answered by your texters. And by opening up that, offering them to be able to text in and get their questions answered can be a lot more comfortable, especially for younger generations who the idea of calling somebody to ask for help can feel really daunting. And we all know that in the voter space, it can be really challenging to figure out how you're supposed to vote, particularly in certain states, because some websites are a hot mess. So giving people as many avenues as possible to get their voting questions answered is a really powerful thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. So that's why I'm really passionate about talking about voter protection and voter education via text message. So a couple final thoughts before we get to the Q&A portion. First and foremost, I gave you a couple examples of what I have done in the past, but what I have done in the past is not the present. So keep getting creative. These are just a few examples of what you can do, but our space is always evolving and is always changing. So don't lose that creative energy in your texting program and keep coming up with new, different ways to use texting to benefit your whole organization. There's a lot of benefits to expanding your texting program. First and foremost, we're going to minimize opt-outs. When we're asking them to do different things, they're not as likely to opt out on every single text message. If you're just asking for money all the time and you're not giving them anything else, people are going to be more likely to opt out of your list. You're going to save so much time for your, I'm going to define them as the field department. So your in-person canvassers and the people that are on the phones all the time, by removing the things that take up a lot of their time, but they're not as efficient at, and replacing that with texters, you're going to save them so much time to be able to invest in persuasion, in making people's plans to vote with them, getting them to turn out to vote. So it's a great way to really maximize what they're best at. And then finally, texting builds really strong volunteer teams, and you can have an amazing digital culture with your texting team. I love my texters. I still talk to many of my texters from the past few years because we built strong relationships over the internet. And then finally, my recommendation is to lobby to have your texting live underneath your organizing department. I've been fortunate, and the reason I've been able to do all these really great texting programs is that texting has always lived under organizing for everything that I've done. So I've had the ability to pull in fundraising, pull in things for events that we're hosting, give information that the comms department wants us to do, but it lived in organizing. So I was able to kind of flex what kind of messages were going out at different times. If your organization has it living under fundraising exclusively, try and get access to that. Try and get them to move it to organizing, or at least share it amongst the different parts of your organization so that you can have a much more robust texting program that goes beyond fundraising. So with that, we are to the Q&A portion. I am going to scroll through, and it looks like we've got a lot of questions in the chat. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat right now. Tamila is going to drop my contact information. So if you have questions, we'll answer some right now. But at the end of this, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can always reach me at brenna@prompt.io, or you can text that phone number we did the survey to earlier. So 206-603-0022. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to pull up some of the questions that we've gotten so far. Bear with me. This is my first time using this platform, so I'm having some troubles playing with my screen. There we go. All righty. So it looks like I've got a question that says, if we're just starting out with a texting program, do you have ideas for a welcome series? So easing supporters into receiving text from us. This is a fantastic question, and I love that. I would recommend planning it out much like you would any other, like planning it around an event. So if you are planning if you have a specific timeline that you're looking at, introducing the event as what that series is about. So first and foremost, always introduce yourselves. So saying that, hey, this is organization and we are reaching out because of X, Y, and Z. If you already have an opted-in texting list, this is a super easy thing to do. If you have not yet started gathering opt-outs, I would recommend you start there. Or sorry, opt-ins, not opt-outs. My apologies. If you've not yet started gathering opt-ins, students to a texting list, and you have an online web form. So if people are signing up to receive emails from you, you can just simply add a field that is their cell phone number and add a checkbox at the bottom saying that they're opting into receiving text updates from you. I would absolutely avoid doing a fundraising ask as your very first text. But if you can do something like a video that you send out, letting people know what you're doing, or asking them to take part in an action, whether you're having like an online rally or if you're doing an in-person something, just give them something that you're asking for them to participate in, as opposed to just directly asking for money. I hope that answers your question. And if you have, I'm also happy to set up some time so we can chat through that as well. I'm looking for some more questions. I'm not, Tamila, do we have any other questions that I missed? If you want to drop them in the chat, I'm struggling to keep up with the chat because there's a lot of things in here. Oh, it looks like people, I'm reading other people's suggestions. So using how are you doing and how are things are going. So having back and forth conversations and inviting people to engage, that is absolutely an amazing thing to do. I'm a peer-to-peer texter. I am not a blast texter. So I'm all about the engagement and very much not about just yelling at people all the time. So I love the idea of just sending a check-in text as well for a kind of an introductory thing. All right. Are there any other questions? Oh, how is read rate calculated? Okay, so this one is a little bit more challenging. There is a study that gives you the read rate on text messages. Text messages are really hard to figure out exactly who's looked at their phone to read the message, because that is not something that these different platforms will directly give you. However, there are different ways that you can calculate how many people are interacting with your text messages. So there's a couple different ways to do that. The most common way people do is by including a link in the text message. So like the ActBlue link that we talked about, embedding a video on an ActBlue page. When people click on that link, if you have a unique URL to your texting program or to texting, you can track how many people clicked through that message to get to your ActBlue page. So that is one way that you can track to see how effective your messages are being. There are a couple other really cool tools. So for example, when you texted in to do that survey previously today, that's what's called an instant app on our platform. But when people open up the instant app, you get to see all the different clicks and all the different interactions that people have with that app. So we did a survey today, but you can do a web form. You can do all kinds of different things with that. So there's a couple different ways to use other technology with your texting platform to see how effective your text messages are and how much people are interacting with them. And then the most basic way to do that is just check to see how many people are responding to your texts. And if you do a good way of sending engaging messages and asking people to interact with you, that's going to help to drive up your ability to track how effective your messages are being. But when you're sending exclusively outbound broadcast style messages, the only real feedback you get is like if that donation was completed. All right. I'm not seeing, oh, I do see, and there's another question. Benji, that was your question. Perfect. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm happy to hang out for the next, I can do math, 7 minutes, and answer any questions that people do have. But just to follow up with a couple other things, Tamila, who's my partner, has dropped in that we are going to be in chat rooms. There's one that's active right now. So you can pop in and ask about texting, and we're happy to talk about that. You can also text into the number that you did the survey on. So 206-603-0022, and I'm happy to respond that way. Or you can send me an email, brenna@prompt.io. I also, before this call, went through and added y'all on the Netroots app. So feel free to reach out there as well, and I'll get back to you. But I really enjoyed spending time with you today. I hope that this was valuable and you learned something. If you want to give feedback, feel free to give feedback. I'm happy to take it. But I appreciate you all being here with us, and let's have a very beautiful, wonderful, healthy texting ecosystem by sending messages that go beyond fundraising. But thank y'all so much for joining us today.